Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the economy in the United Kingdom, which is always a controversial topic for me because I don't get anywhere near as many views for these videos. So if you're watching and you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button just to show me that you're interested in watching more of these videos. But in today's video, I want to talk about the recent by-election result in Gorton and Denton, which is part of Greater Manchester. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because it shows there are really interesting things going on in UK politics right now. If we have a look at this chart, it shows the outcome of the general election that was held in June 2024. So not that long ago, around about 18 months ago. And obviously Labour won that general election. And you can see here that Andrew Gwynne won this seat by a huge margin. He got over 18,500 seats, which was pretty much more than all of the other parties put together. And you can see that in the June election in 24, the second biggest party was Reform. And that was obviously the start of Reform's momentum. Nigel Farage is leading the Reform Party. They didn't really have enough momentum back in 2024, but since then, they have certainly become big news. And there's a lot of people in the UK saying that if a general election was held tomorrow, then Reform would win hands down against Labour. Interestingly, the Green Party came third, so they came well ahead of the traditional opposition for Labour, which is the Conservatives. And you can see that the Conservatives didn't get a lot of votes in 2024 in this constituency. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. Firstly, everybody was sick of the Conservatives after they'd been in power for such a long period of time, and they'd done a pretty poor job, stumbled their way through COVID, had lots of different prime ministers, including Theresa May and Liz Truss, famously, and then Boris Johnson, who had to resign. And so we ended up with Rishi Sunak, and everybody was really sick and tired of Conservatives. But also, Greater Manchester is part of the Great Wall of voters in the north of England. So the north of England traditionally is seen as being more working class and more Labour, and the south of England is seen as being a bit more affluent, generally speaking, and generally speaking, more favourable of Conservatives. That's broadly how it's been for 100 years or so in the UK. So the Conservatives weren't really in contention to win this seat in the general election. And then the Liberal Democrats, who historically were the option vote. If you didn't want to vote Labour or Conservative, or you wanted to vote tactically, so if you were voting to try to stop one of those two parties winning, you might vote for the Liberal Democrats. But you can see that the Lib Dems were really not very popular in June of 2024. So it was an interesting outcome, but obviously Labour had a landslide victory. And you can see at the bottom here that the turnout in 2024 for the general election was 47.8%. So around about half of the constituents voted, which is a pretty decent number in terms of an outcome. Now, the reason why a by-election has been held, and also I want to just talk about the word by-election, because when I hear that in mainstream media, it sort of turns me off. I think, oh, by-election, who cares? It's some Mickey Mouse election happening in the country. Well, actually, a by-election is basically when a member of parliament resigns from their seat or can't continue because of ill health or dies or something happens where the MP says, I can't carry on doing this job anymore. And you can't just pass on your position to another Labour Party member. You have to have another election amongst all of the people in that constituency. And the reason why it's called a by-election is the word by in Old English meant secondary. So you have by roads and other terms like that. So by-election is why it's called that anyway. So we've just had this election. And the reason why I'm making this video is because the outcome was really quite remarkable. So this is the voting for the election that has just been held. And as you can see, the winner by quite a long way was the Green Party. Now, the Green Party in the UK, obviously it's the environmental party. They're trying to do things that are, green, look after the environment, all of those sort of things. So it's the sort of thing that people are quite interested in. Everybody likes to be more green and more environmentally conscious, but they haven't really been a realistic option as a voting concept in the UK. For a long period of time, they only had one MP. So I think from 2010 onwards, they held a seat in Brighton. And Brighton is seen as being a more sort of environmentally conscious part of the UK. Lots of people who go there are Green supporters, obviously. So they had this one MP between 2010 and 2024. She then subsequently retired from being an MP, but they have held on to that seat. So they had that one option. But in 2024, they actually picked up three more MPs around the UK. So they had four seats out of hundreds of seats. So they're very, very small minority party. So this is really quite a shock. And Hannah Spencer isn't a career politician. So sometimes when you have a by-election result and the winner is a surprise, it might be because it's somebody quite famous or a long-standing MP who's decided to leave one of the other parties and then stand either independently or for a new party like Reform, for example. But Hannah Spencer is actually quite young. She is a qualified plumber. That's what she's been doing up until today when she got voted in as a new MP. She was operating as a plumber. In fact, she went in her speech when she accepted, she said that she'd just been qualified 2 weeks ago as a plasterer as well as a plumber. So she's a woman of many skills, but she's now a full-time MP. She'll be going down to the Houses of Parliament to represent Gorton and Denton. So quite a big surprise. Now, second in the vote is Reform. And I think that's a surprise to a lot of people because they were expecting Reform to start winning all of these by-elections because they're now the party of choice for a lot of people. A lot of people are interested in Nigel Farage and his new party. But the fact that they haven't won and the fact that the Green Party did win tells us that when it comes down to voting and actually putting people into power, there is a reluctance to vote for Reform. And so rather than voting for Labour, people decided not to vote for Reform, to decide to go for the Green Party. That is a strong message that tells us that maybe the UK isn't quite ready for Reform just yet. Reform might not be ready to actually win any sort of election. Labour came in at third, and you can see the number of votes. That is half of the number of votes that they got in June of 24, so 18 months ago. So we have seen a massive swing here, and this is really important because Labour has held this seat since 1939. No, sorry, 1935. So it's been in power for almost 100 years in this constituency. And when you look at the results for June 24, out of the 400 seats that Labour won, this ranked at number 39 in terms of the majority. So this was seen as being one of the strongest seats for Labour. It was a no-brainer. You're always going to win this seat because everybody votes for Labour. Well, clearly they haven't. And this is really embarrassing for Keir Starmer. And also, there's another really interesting story. Well, there's a couple of interesting stories here that I wanted to share. Firstly, Andrew Gwynne, who was the previous MP, who is obviously no longer in place, he actually got taken out of the Labour Party in 2025 because he was exposed in some WhatsApp groups. Some WhatsApp messages were published whereby he'd actually said that they were talking about a 72-year-old woman who was a voter in this constituency, and she'd been complaining about the bin collections, that they weren't collecting the bins enough or on time or something like that. And in this WhatsApp message group, he'd said something along the lines of maybe she'll be mown down before the next election. So very disparaging about one of his voters. And so he was sacked from the Labour Party. He was removed as the health minister and the whip was taken off him. And he then subsequently decided to retire on grounds of ill health. We don't know the full details. I think it's something to do with mental health. I think the stress and the pressure of everything that went on around that story got to him in the end. So that's why he left his seat. But interestingly, when the Labour candidates were coming forward, the strongest candidate was a guy called Andy Burnham, who was the mayor of Manchester. He's very popular in the local area. He's quite a well-known, outspoken politician. He's been around for quite a long time, relatively young, but very, very popular. So he wanted to stand in this seat. And I think if he did, there's a reasonably good chance he would have won because he is quite famous and quite popular and is seen as a contender against Keir Starmer. In fact, in the last wrote for the leader of the Labour Party, he stood. And one of the reasons why he wasn't given the option of taking on this vote was because Keir Starmer is worried that Andy Burnham, if he becomes an MP, would then be basically a challenger for his job. If the growing sentiment at the moment that maybe Keir Starmer isn't the right guy for the job, Andy Burnham could well have been a contender to take over as the leader of the Labour Party. So Keir Starmer said no to Andy Burnham, and that's really blown up in his face. It's really backfired because, partly as a result of that, they lost a seat that they've held for almost 100 years. This is a disaster from Labour's point of view. Now, just to finish off, the Conservatives got 706 votes and the Lib Democrats got 650, which is a total embarrassment to both of them. If we have a look at the swing in the votes between the summer of 24 and today, you can see that the Green Party's vote has increased by over 10,700 votes, so an increase of 257%. That is massive. That tells us that a lot of the people in the constituency really were not happy with Labour. And just to go back to the turnout, importantly, the turnout for the recent by-election was 47.5%, so almost identical to the general election, because sometimes in these local by-elections, you don't get a very good turnout. Only half the people turn out compared to a general election. And so you can get an unusual outcome if not enough people vote. But we definitely had enough people voting here. So this is a genuine message to all of the parties. So the Green Party has come out of this as massive winners. Reform has also seen a big increase in its vote, up by over 6,000, so up by 135%. So that's positive from Reform's point of view, but the negative is that they didn't win this seat. So whilst they're growing in popularity, they haven't quite got it to get the full votes. So that is a concern, I think, for Nigel Farage. Labour, their vote was down by 50% in what was seen as being an absolute shoo-in, a no-brainer, easy win. You can put anybody in for the election. They're bound to win it. That was the view taken by Labour, which has gone horribly wrong for them. But the Conservatives, their vote was down by 72%. You would have expected, given everything that's going on at the moment, the backlash against Labour and Keir Starmer and all of the Epstein files and Peter Mandelson and all of the negativity that we've had around that over the past couple of months, you would have thought this was a good time for the Conservatives to start picking up votes. But they actually saw a fall in their votes, so it was down by 4,700, 72% down. That is horrible news for the Conservatives. That tells the Conservatives that they are doing something very wrong at the moment. And so they may well be in for a leadership change at some point if the rest of by-election results go this way. And the Liberal Democrats saw their vote down by 59%. So that's, again, totally embarrassing. I mean, you should be able to pick up, when Labour are losing 50% of their votes, there are a lot of votes available to pick up. So what this tells us is that the UK at the moment does not like Labour. In their stronghold, they lost 50% of their votes. They don't like Liberal Democrats, and they really don't like the Conservatives. So it's what are the other options? I think that's basically what people are saying. Who else is left to vote for? Well, you would have thought that Reform, this was their chance to pick up another seat. But I think there are reservations. People, when it comes down to it, are thinking, do I really want to vote for Reform and all of their policies that they're coming up with? There's a lot of issues around immigration and things that people are uncomfortable with, because Reform is it leans very much to the right. And a lot of people in Reform, or historically in the Reform movement, were sort of almost in the Nationalist Party and those sort of ideas. So I think there are reservations for a lot of voters in the UK about voting for Reform. And also, they don't have a lot of experienced MPs. They've got a small number of high-profile ones, but they don't have a lot of people who are standing in these elections who've got experience in terms of doing the job. So I think there's two things that are holding people back on voting for Reform. But just want to have a look at this, which basically shows the position, the changes since the general election. So since the election, there has been a number of by-elections, and you can see that in this, and this shows what's happened in those votes. So Labour have lost 7 MPs. So they've seen 7 of their MPs losing their seats as a result of by-elections. Conservatives have lost 5, so that's the story we've just talked about. People do not like Conservatives or Labour at the moment. When they're coming up for another vote, they are not voting for those two parties. Liberal Democrats have stayed the same. The independents, so this is people who are standing against Labour Conservatives, have won 7. Reform have only won 3. Now that's interesting because if they were if they were the party that was gaining power and were going to be the alternative choice, you would have thought that they would have picked up all of these extra seats. They haven't. The Green Party's won one and another party has won another. Now we've got some Welsh elections coming up soon, and it's expected that Labour, should do well, but I think what we're probably going to see is that there will be a nationalist vote. Everybody will be voting for the Welsh parties, not for Labour. But I wanted to make this video today because I think this result is really quite interesting because it tells us that people are not happy with Labour in a very big stronghold majority area in Greater Manchester. They voted against their party that they've been voting for almost 100 years. People are not happy with Keir Starmer and everything that's going on, not just with the Epstein files and Peter Mandelson, but I think with the economy and his lack of sort of strong leadership. A good example of this is that when Labour first came into power, they announced this amazing landmark deal that they were going to give the Chagos Islands to Malaysia. That basically, this was a strip of land that the UK had ownership over for hundreds of years, and they decided to give that back. And this was seen as being a benevolent gesture, then Labour being the good guys. Donald Trump then came out and said, I don't agree with this. Why are you giving this land away? It's an important military base, and the US has some military posts there as well. It shouldn't be happening. And as a result of that, Labour have now pulled back and haven't signed the ratification agreement. So Keir Starmer is showing that if Donald Trump tells him what to do, he's listening. And I don't think the people in the UK really like that sort of leadership. They want somebody who makes their own decisions, who stands up for themselves, who is basically a strong leader. I don't think so far Keir Starmer has come across as strong. He looks weak, and people around him have not been very good, very supportive. So he's had the Peter Mandelson affair where he appointed him as the foreign secretary, ambassador, whatever it was, for the USA, knowing that he had a relationship with Epstein, and that that carried on after Epstein was arrested and imprisoned. It just seemed a catalogue of nightmares. And Keir Starmer then said, he lied to me. I asked him the questions and he told me some answers and they were lies. Why was he even asking him the questions? Why was he even thinking of appointing somebody who'd had a relationship with Epstein, beyond the fact when everything came out? So just an absolute own goal, complete disaster from Keir Starmer's point of view. But it's not just that. He had Angela Rayner, who was his deputy, she was the housing minister. She had to resign because she'd been not completely honest about what she'd been doing when she bought a property. So a housing related issue for the housing minister, totally embarrassing for her. There's just been a catalogue of problems that Keir Starmer has encountered that he hasn't dealt with well. So I don't think Labour is very popular at the moment with many people. The Conservatives are completely in the toilet. They are finished at the moment in terms of a force in UK politics. We thought that Reform were coming up on the wings, that they were going to come in and start winning all of these seats. They haven't. And I think I've covered off the reasons for that. I think people are worried about Reform long term, whether or not they would be the right party of choice. So we're seeing that voters are not voting in Reform. They are not winning these seats. And the Liberal Democrats, they're a bit of a joke. Nobody's voting for them. So there's not many options left. And I think that's why the Green Party won. It was like when you've written off all of the other parties, you say, well, there's only really the Green Party left. Might as well vote for them. So this was a big surprise. First time the Greens have won a seat outside of the south of England. It's only their 5th seat ever. So I don't know whether this is, the Green Party now rising to power. I doubt it. But there's a mess going on in UK politics at the moment. And I just wanted to make this video really to make sure you're aware of what's going on, talk about some of the issues, because I thought it was quite interesting. So thank you very much for watching this video all the way through to the end. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Also give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Thank you so much to everybody that's supporting me. You can support me through my competition at the moment, where you can win my property down in Devon, or a cash alternative prize. Scan the QR code on the screen now or click the link in the description below if you're interested in that. Thank you also to everyone that supported me in other ways. If you bought me a coffee, sent me a YouTube super thanks, or signed up as a patron or a member. Really appreciate that support. Thank you so much. And here's something to put a smile on your face.